Hello, everyone. I'm Frank Garza with Lean Startup Company, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the webcast. Today's topic is how startup Code Naturally is enabling students to solve the problems of tomorrow. And moderating the discussion is our own Lean Startup Company faculty member, Hisham Ibrahim. Our guest is CEO of Code Naturally, Singh. And with that, I'll hand things off to Hisham.
Thank you, Sukh. I really appreciate your time. I'd love to start off with just talking about coding. What is coding? Why is it important?
Sure. So coding or programming is the process of giving your computer instructions. It's what makes up our favorite applications, powers our smart fridges, powers our iWatches. It's important because as a lot of parents will tell me, it's the language of the future. It's becoming an integral part of like what students need to know. It's like a 21st century kind of literacy. It's almost as important as learning a foreign language. Gives them an opportunity to actually create something through giving their computer instructions in a programming language.
Now, is it only important for kids who want to grow up to be software engineers or programmers?
Absolutely not. So programming is really fed into every kind of field. I have friends that study biology or are going to continue to study medicine, and they always bring up to me how important it is for them to know some amount of programming and how much it enhances their ability to do their job and work with other people in their field. It's important because it's a creative pursuit. It's a form of self-expression and an opportunity for students to be creative and just express themselves through actually making something. And just being able to do that and critically think and iterate and kind of solve through and make something, I think that's a skill that will help students regardless of what they do. A lot of the kids that we work with will tell me that they want to be veterinarians, that they want to be professional baseball players. That doesn't mean that they don't absolutely love programming and that it isn't like an integral part of their school life or their home life.
Now, I started my career as a software engineer. I was a programmer, and way back in the day, coding has come such a long way. Programming languages have evolved drastically, and programming tools have evolved, and it's become much more accessible. But one aspect of it that I'm not sure how much has changed is the gender gap in programming in the coding world. Whether it was back when I was in school or companies that I've worked at, it was overwhelmingly male. So what's that look like now? What are you seeing with Code Naturally? Is that evolving? Is that gender gap closing? Are you doing anything to encourage more girls to participate in coding programs?
Yeah, so it's definitely one of those things that seems to be narrowing. We do have, over time in the last 3 years that we've been doing this, the amount of girls that are interested in programming and actually doing it has increased dramatically. The first camp that we did, I think, was actually all boys. And so it was like really depressing for me. I have 2 older sisters to just see just a room full of boys. And so during that camp, we actually partnered with a local VC, Bud Colligan, to provide scholarships specifically for girls to get into coding. And
That's great.
All 6 of those girls loved the experience they had. It evened out the room because the camp was only 12 students, so that was actually 50-50. And I actually contacted one of those parents for our summer camp this year, and it was great. They moved to San Diego, but the girl is still coding. She's still making awesome projects, and she sees it as like an integral part of who she is. She makes these beautiful projects and illustrations all through writing JavaScript. Currently, like we just had a camp this week. There was definitely more boys than girls. Don't get me wrong. I think it was like 25% girls. Not what we like to see. We had another camp at Cabrillo College, which is a local community college. That one was 50-50. It was great. So there we actually had an even split. We actually partnered with that college this summer because they were willing to work with us in providing an all-girls summer camp. So there's 1 week of camp.
That's awesome.
Literally all girls. And like it's very well enrolled. And there's been a lot of really cool studies that show that when you can provide, an all-female environment for girls to do math, computer science, or engineering, that they're more likely to do better, just because when there are males in the room or when the teacher is the male, you're reminded of those stereotypes. You're reminded that there are these kinds of paths or something that, you know, that we fall into. The other thing that I think has been really helpful for us as a company is that we have fantastic female educators. I think our educators are literally half male, half female. For the all girls camp, it will be all girls teaching it, and they're fantastic role models. They talk to the girls that are at the camp and let them know how important it is for them to keep going and for them to be a role model for other girls at school, for their friends, and for them to just keep it up. And often, like, a lot of the girls that we have in our camp tend to be some of our best programmers and tend to really, you know, have this attention to detail that makes them especially great, you know, engineers and programmers. They really, really, the boys want to rush through it and kind of get through like doing, you know, the funnest part. Whereas a lot of the girls are a lot more diligent. They're willing to slow down and really learn the key points before moving on. And so I think that's something that's been really impressive for us.
That's really awesome. And I actually just answered my next question, which is what differences do you see between girls and boys in the coding classes? You just mentioned one. Are there any other differences that you've observed?
A lot of the programming that we do is visual, so they end up like making all their different game screens. I've noticed that girls are a lot more willing to actually like put things together in a more complete way, where they're willing to, as I was saying, like pay attention to those details, to have the screen actually be symmetrical, to use beautiful fonts to actually make it look complete, to work on these logos for the just the small games that they're making. That, and you know, all those little attentions to detail, that makes all the difference. I mean, especially I'm sure from your experience as a programmer, being able to actually, you know, add those little details makes all the difference. I know some of my favorite applications just have just those little things, and that's why I choose to use them over their competition. So definitely that. And like they see it a lot more so in like this long-term kind of scope, which is really surprising. Like we had a fifth grader at our camp this week. She got the leadership badge for being the most diligent student for the entire camp. And even during her breaks, she was there all day. She was there from 8 to 5 during her breaks. She could have done anything else. And she was like, you know, I'd rather keep programming, or I'd rather do Duolingo. And it was like really amazing to me that she had that kind of diligence to be like, you know, I don't really need the break. I'm only here for a week. I might as well get the most out of it. Whereas like all the boys in the room were like, oh, it's break time. It's time to, you know, where are the children?
Boys will always be boys. That's awesome. All right, let's talk about lean startup. So what inspired you to become a lean startup? How did it all start?
So it started in an entrepreneurship class at UC Santa Cruz. I had a professor, John Scarden, that taught the class. He's a huge fan of the lean startup. He applies it in his own startups that he has over in Monterey. And he introduced us to the book, and he essentially forced us to read the book and really apply the principles to a business design competition that we were doing. So we actually had to go out and interview customers. And like during that specific process of actually speaking to potential customers, that's really where I found the value for myself in the lean startup, because I had such an easy time getting a hold of these customers, actually communicating with them. And often they would give me ideas that I never would have thought of, that were just completely out of the range of like what I thought my potential solution might have been. And so I think just having that experience and realizing that people will happily tell you how to make money if you're just willing to talk to them and ask, that really opened it up for me.
Great. Now, when you first started, you know, were there any foundational leap of faith assumptions that you had?
For the Code Naturally app?
Yeah.
Definitely.
What were one or two examples of these big risky assumptions, and how did you go about validating them?
Sure. I think one of our really early assumptions with the first version of our application is that we assumed that, so the original version of our application, students actually handwrote their code. And we assumed that was something that all students would want to do because it's a little bit more natural for them. That's actually where we got our name, Code Naturally, is because we were like, oh yeah, it's like the natural way to go about providing this text. When we actually tested that assumption with students, it was very clear that they hated handwriting and that they were faster and better at typing. Um, I think others were that that teachers would want to that all teachers would want to teach computer science. That was a very general assumption that we were like, oh yeah, of course. They want to incorporate it. It's STEAM. They can make history projects. They can make science projects. They can make all these interdisciplinary projects with programming. And that was a huge assumption. As soon as we actually started talking to teachers, we realized how much they actually had on their plates. Teachers are expected to do multiple jobs. They have all these different subjects that they have to cram into their class. Asking them to do another thing was like pulling teeth. Unless the teacher was actually interested and had some background or some outside interest, it was very difficult to, get teachers to, you know, teach computer science. When we learned that, we actually put together a little business model where we were like, okay, how about we send an instructor to your school? And that way you don't have to teach, but we'll send an educator in for you to teach. And that worked out fantastically. We still have that business model with multiple schools. All the teachers love it because they get a break in their day. They get to take care of, I mean, as I was saying, they have an insane amount on their plates. They have a ton to do. And so for them to have an hour, even once a week, to catch up on all of this stuff while somebody else is teaching, just makes their lives so much easier. And also, like, they don't have to think about how to teach programming, and their kids get that enriching experience without them having to go through professional development, without them having to, make additional time in the class in order to do that. And so I think that was a big one. We assumed that all teachers would just want to do it. We were very wrong.
How did you test that business model where you sent in an educator?
So we put together just a packet, a proposal of like, hey, like, we'll send an educator. Here's a rough idea of the curriculum. It'll be an 8-part class. And it came about actually from speaking to a principal, because the principal is who made that clear to us. He was like, my teachers aren't going to be able to do this. Like, they have a ton of stuff. And he actually asked, he was like, can you guys come and teach? And so it was a really funny question. I was like, we actually have no way of making money right now, so we can absolutely come and teach. And so it came from that conversation. And then, so he was like, put together a proposal. We put it together for him. That was in Pajaro Valley. And we actually worked with Microsoft and Driscoll's to get the funding necessary to do that program there, because it's more of a low income school. As soon as we started that program there, other schools that we've been working with here in Scotts Valley and Santa Cruz were like, how come you didn't tell us that you had this model? We would love a teacher to come into the class and do this for us. And so it was something that we really didn't expect to be, very scalable. We just thought it was something that we could use to test out the application curriculum. And instantly there was a lot more interest than we could have expected. We very quickly ran out of the educators necessary to be able to send to all of these schools.
Really interesting. So it sounds like in this case, your first MVP or experiment was a packet, basically a sales packet. What came about? Like, give me some numbers. Like, what did that result in terms of number of schools or number of students? Just based on showing them this packet.
Sure. So before we actually put together that packet, we had maybe 300-400 students that had tried the application. After we put together this packet and started this business model, our number of students actively using the application went up to about 2,000 to 3,000. And so it was a significant increase for us, just because it allowed us to access students from 3rd to 8th grade. It opened up our curriculum to all of these students, as well as the application. The number of projects went from something like 1,000 to 10 or 15,000. And so it was a significant increase.
Wow. All right. Let's talk about experiments, because they're at the core of the methodology. In general, how do you design and run experiments? Because I assume you still do, right? You're still iterating, you're still learning. How do you design and run an experiment?
Sure, yeah. So a lot of our experiments today are around actually getting parents into the door at our Santa Cruz Code Center in downtown Santa Cruz, or getting teachers and schools to approach us for professional development or purchasing software. And so generally speaking, we start with a hypothesis of, if we put this much money into this mode of marketing, we're expecting to get out the following, whether it's this number of leads, this number of dollars out, or just interest. I mean, we've noticed that instead of just focusing on the number of dollars that we get out of a specific experiment, if we focus on just the number of leads or the number of people coming into the center, or just getting that free webinar, that's significantly more valuable to us than just going for that close. And so we often talk, me and my CTO often talk about, if we put this in, what are we expecting? How many people are we expecting to sign up for this? And then we go and actually run the experiment and see how that benchmarks to what we were expecting. And if it's like 70 to 80% of what we were expecting, we usually consider that a success.
What I really like about that is, oftentimes when the lean startup is applied, companies only think about it in the context of product development, not business development. But it sounds like you have a very good holistic mindset when it comes to applying the principles of lean startup, that you're thinking about growth hypotheses, and you're using it to drive your business model, and marketing and growth, as well as features of the product offering itself. Which takes me to kind of another point, which is what are some of the, it sounds like you really have your customers, which there's two of them, right? There's teachers and there's students at the heart of your process. What are some really interesting validated learnings that you've gained by using this hypothesis-driven process?
Sure. So we actually have three actual customers. We have the students, the parents, and like the teachers in schools. We've always tried to focus specifically on the student, just because they're the end user of the product. They're the ones that are actually going to be programming with the application. And so I think when we first started, that was something we realized within like the first couple of months of actually testing with kids, is that, if we can make them happy, if we can make them excited about actually making something with code, then that's successful for us. That's a way for us to really go about ensuring that we're going to be successful, because the kids love what they're doing. And so when we release new features for the application, we really center it around, well, what are the students going to do with this? Will they be able to use it? And we have this kind of like, I guess it's a value within our company of putting students before teachers, before parents. And so like using that little bit of a hierarchy has been really successful for us, just because students love the application, that reduces the stress of the teacher. Parents love seeing what their students have made. And so just using that little bit of a hierarchy has really helped us to kind of guide the way that we develop features and the way that we develop curriculum. I also wanted to talk about just not underestimating students. That's something that we did very much so early on. Within our first summer camps, we had some curriculum. We had maybe 8 lessons total to teach them just the beginnings of programming. The curriculum was loosely based on a computer science class that's taught at UC Santa Cruz. So it was using about like maybe half of the curriculum from the class. We assumed that would be enough curriculum for students for like a whole school year. We quickly learned that it was actually only enough curriculum for them for about 3 months, and that students can learn at a much faster pace than we expected. We never thought that they would be able to compete with college students in their understanding or like their learnings of these concepts. But when we gave them quizzes from the class from UC Santa Cruz, often our 4th and 5th grade classes actually did better than the college students. And that was something that we never could have expected. We totally thought that they would struggle with a lot of these concepts. They would struggle to apply them just because college students were struggling to apply them. When I took computer science at UC Santa Cruz, I was struggling immensely. That's honestly a part of why we started this company. And my CTO was the person that taught me a lot of these concepts and that made it digestible for me. And so we never thought that they would do this well with these concepts. And often we found that they did better. Their projects were more detailed. They were able to apply the concepts at a much higher level than the older students. And it was just because they were more interested. they thought of learning the program as an opportunity for them. And they thought of it kind of like a game. Whereas, once you're in college, you're like, I have to pass this class or I'm going to fail. And, they understood that that's not what it was. They had a way better understanding that if the project wasn't running, if something wasn't working, that just meant that they weren't there yet. They were really developing a growth mindset through programming, especially programming with code naturally, that we never could have expected. Like, we assumed that they would like it because they get to make stuff, but we never thought that they would like it so much that they would learn beyond what the college students up on the hill were doing. And so that was something that really caught our entire team off guard. We kicked into hyper gear trying to create enough curriculum to keep up with our students. And we still continue to struggle with that today. They continue to really surprise us at how quickly they can consume concepts and apply them, and then ask these really, really high level questions that our computer science educators that are third or fourth years at UC Santa Cruz, they're totally caught off guard. Like, I cannot believe this fourth grader is asking me about arrays. I cannot believe this fifth grader wants to know how objects works. And so I think that's something that continues to surprise us to this day, like how much they can actually learn, how interested they can actually be. So we definitely learn not to underestimate our students.
That really amazes me. Sukh, it sounds like kind of your secret sauce, your magic sauce is all centered around how you engage with and embed your different stakeholders, different customers all the time. Talk to me about how you do that and how you inspire your team, the company, to continually do that. What does that look like in real life for a startup like Code Naturally to engage its customers in the different cycles and iterations of creating and building out the product as well as building out the business?
Sure. So I think, like, my father's a business owner. He's had businesses all my life, and I think one thing that I learned from him very early on was that business is relationships. Business isn't just taking people's money. Business isn't just selling something. It's these relationships that you have with people. And so, as we've developed our application, our business model, we've developed these fantastic relationships with local teachers, with local principals, that they've been the biggest drivers for our growth. They're the ones that have really made it possible for us to get here. And I think it's just consulting with them on a regular basis, letting them know what our plans are and getting their feedback. Like, what do you think? Do you actually think this is good for your students? How do you think we could make it better? And so those are questions that we continually ask our teachers, our principals, our parents, and our students. Like, so many of the features that are in the application today were inspired by students being like, this sucks. This is it'd be way better if it was this way. And then, like, us taking notes, trying it, and tracking whether students actually use that new feature. And like 9 times out of 10, they would. And so whenever we bring on new educators, we emphasize them to listen to parents, to listen to students. If they're frustrated about something, ask them how it could be better, because often they'll give us a better idea than we could have thought of. And same with parents. Parents have actually led to so much of the business that we have today, because they've been like, I like this model, this after school model, but it'd be really helpful if I could just drop my kid off whenever it's convenient for me. And it's like, oh, great. That's a new business model. You can drop them in at the center, like, whenever you'd like. And so I think just listening and just actually, like, being open to new ideas from all these different parties really makes that possible. For our educators, we have meetings with them on like a weekly basis where we ask them about what's the hardest part of your job, like what's difficult right now. And luckily, they love working with the kids. I think they're all surprised at how ferocious they are in their learning and in their engagement with the application. And every now and then they'll have an issue. Like, the kids write really sloppy code. And it's just because, they're literally just learning. Of course, adults write really sloppy code. I'm sure they have friends that write worse codes than some of our students. And so, from that, we're able to actually figure out, like, okay, how do we incorporate teaching the students to comment correctly at a really early stage? How do we incorporate teaching them to indent? Is that something that we should even be teaching them, since most text editors will actually indent for you? It's like, yeah, obviously, when these kids grow up, or as they grow up and move on to using VS Code or Atom, it's going to do the indenting for them. So, like, why even go through that pain of forcing them to learn? Instead, we just added a button that just does all the indentation the way that it should be. And that made the life for educators significantly easier because they didn't have to scroll through and re-indent everything. Instead, they could click a button and then very quickly find the error in the student's code, walk them through why that happened, and then move on to the next student. And so I think it's just that matter of like letting them know that nothing is perfect. The application, the curriculum, our business model, letting everybody know that it all has a very long way to go and that it's only going to get better through people speaking up and through letting us know like what frustrates them, what could be better, what would they like to see, and then just listening and try and figuring out what's worth, what path is actually worth following down. Obviously, you can't listen to every piece of advice you get, but just being open and letting everybody have that moment to actually speak their mind and comfortably know that I'm not that attached to how things are. But like my biggest job as a CEO is to just like listen to them and to figure out like how can I make their lives easier. And that's true for our students, for our parents, our principals, and of course our educators.
The educators, I mean, do they think about themselves as entrepreneurs? Or do you help them think about themselves as entrepreneurs?
I think we definitely push them to think about themselves as entrepreneurs. I've definitely mentioned lean startup to several of them. I've actually given the book to a few of our educators as they've gone on to the next path in their lives. And always try to let them know that, this is because they're third or fourth years in computer science, that working at Code Naturally is a stepping stone and an opportunity for them to learn and experiment. That we want to provide that environment for them where they can really try things out. If they have ideas that they would like to experiment with, let us know, because this is a safe environment for you to do so. You're not going to lose anything by trying something out that you think could be risky or that you think that the kids might like. And it's led to just a plethora of awesome lessons for the kids, ideas for projects, just different ways to go about engaging them. Even on the side of content for parents or content for just social media, our educators have taken the lead in creating videos and writing blogs and doing so much of this work that's completely outside of like what they would normally do. They just want to do it because it's an opportunity for them to, practice that interest. And so I think that's been like the biggest way that they've learned that, that they too are entrepreneurs in some way, that they're going to contribute through creating something.
Something that we always face in at least in larger companies when we're introducing or applying a different way of working is senior management always wants to know what's the ROI. Like if we do this, either how much time or cost is it going to save me, or how much revenue impact it's going to have. Now, as the CEO of a small startup like Code Naturally, do you have a sense of what revenue impact or cost savings you've had from applying lean startup principles, or the number of ideas that were implemented that came from customer engagements?
Sure. So as far as like ideas that came from customer engagement, I would say that at least 20% of our revenue comes from these business models, these ideas that came directly from our customers' mouths, where they said that this is what they wanted. From our first business model of sending an educator into the school to expanding professional development to be much more supportive to these technical teachers, all of that really came from people just saying that that's what they wanted. And that, of course, it's a little bit of a risk to assume that that's going to work for everybody, but generally speaking, it has scaled really well in providing that resource or providing that opportunity to a lot more people. And as far as like continuing to do experiments on building our customer base, I would say that we continue to apply those lean startup principles in actually having a hypothesis when we do marketing and figuring out like what are our expectations, and learning that the return on investment isn't going to be immediate, that it might be 1 month down the line, that it might be 2 months down the line, and that you need to actually give value up front to your customer before expecting that return on investment. You can't just push to sell. You have to actually let them know that you care. You have to show them that you're doing this for their kids and for their students, and giving them an opportunity to actually try out the application, try out the curriculum before just having to, actually purchase it. And so giving them that opportunity to test as well, and waiting and giving them that time to really digest it before expecting that return on investment is something that I think we've done a really good job of applying.
That makes a lot of sense. Now we've talked quite a bit about hypotheses and metrics and experiments that you've run. What tools do you use to keep track of these metrics, to measure them and to keep track of them?
Sure. So for application features, for just student progress within the application, we use Mixpanel to see what features are actually getting used and which ones aren't. Use Google Analytics to see how are different. Google Analytics and the Facebook Pixel have been pretty helpful in figuring out how customers actually navigate our website and make that decision. MailChimp has been super integral in actually like sending out that content that educators create to see what gets a response, what gets shared, what gets opened. We also use Microsoft Excel just to like keep track of, just things that aren't as big, that are just these much smaller experiments. And so I think those 4 tools are the main things that we use to actually track these experiments that we run, as well as Stripe. Stripe's been pretty helpful in just providing like, this is how much revenue you're getting when you do these specific things.
So how many experiments do you think you run on average, let's say per month?
Oh, as of recently, it's gone up so significantly since we've opened up the Code Center, just because every marketing push we do is an experiment, and we try to make them smaller and smaller. But we do print media, we do social media, we do AdWords, we do all these different kinds of marketing. And if you're not tracking and you're not figuring out what you're getting out of those, you're almost burning money, because like often we've been really surprised by the findings. People often say that social media is the only way to go about reaching those specific customers. We found that we get much greater return on just paying a local company called Clutch Courier to pass out flyers or put up flyers at every grocery store, at every bus stop. That we've gotten significantly larger return on investment on doing something that's actually like very manual and just involves a person doing it over these really, really large marketing spends on Facebook or AdWords. And so we've been very surprised by that. But I would say probably at least 20 to 25 experiments a month.
Wow, that's fantastic. Now, your Code Naturally is still kind of early in its life cycle. Would you say that you're in an early growth stage at this point, or how would you describe it?
We're approaching that early growth stage right now. We've stayed local in Santa Cruz to allow us to really better track a lot of that experimenting and have that relationship with those customers. But into the fall, we'll actually be making our national push for the first time. We actually haven't made our software or any of our services available outside of Santa Cruz County up to this point.
So from the inception of Code Naturally until this point, how would you say having a lean mindset has helped you get to this point? Or maybe the opposite, if you didn't have a lean mindset, what do you think would have happened?
Totally. I think having that lean mindset let us focus on the fact that we weren't going to be able to get to this point either without a large amount of investment or through actually figuring out a way to make money. I think that was one thing that the book really emphasizes, where it's like, don't do things just because you think it's cool, because you think people might like it. Make sure that there's a way that you're actually going to be able to profit from being able to do this, because revenue is like the oxygen for any startup. And so from that very early point, we had to know, like, okay, how are we actually going to be able to support ourselves? Mom and dad are not going to cover this rent beyond this specific month. They're nice, they want to help, but ultimately you have to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. You have to be able to make money from what you do. And I think within the first year of us actually existing as a company, we were able to start bringing in that revenue. There's a really great blog post by Paul Graham where he talks about doing things that don't scale, just doing things to figure out what customers want, make those smaller bits of revenue, and continue. And I think that's something that we were really able to apply, where we did several business models that we knew would not scale, but would provide the revenue necessary for us to get to that next business model that would. And so I think having that lean mindset really allowed us to focus on that. Okay, like, how are we going to make money from this? And then how are we going to do the next thing that would actually be scalable?
I think that's fantastic, Sukh. I'd like to close with, if there was one piece of advice that you would share with a fellow entrepreneur, either from your own experience or could have been a piece of advice that you've received that has served you really well, what would that be?
If you can pre-sell, do it. If you have an idea for a business or for something that you want to do, and I mean, I know that question of asking, like, would you pay for this is a fantastic question. Asking them, would you pay for this now if I give you a discount while we get this ready for you? I think that question right there really lets you know, because I think a lot of people, especially if you're asking within your friend group or within people you know, they want to be supportive. If you have an idea, they're going to say that, yeah, absolutely, I'd pay for it until it actually exists. And so if you can actually get someone to give you money for something before that thing even exists, that really validates that it's worth doing. That really validates that you have customers already that need your product. So I think if you can do that, that really starts you off on a good footing when you're doing those initial customer interviews. And to, of course, do those initial customer interviews. Nothing can be more important than talking to your potential customer. And I guess last one would be to make sure that you speak to the right decision maker. It's not just for us, for example, it's not just talking to the principal. That was an assumption that we had in the beginning, but most of the sales that we've gotten have been through teachers, really campaigning for us, saying that they love using the tool, that they want it in their classroom, that they think it would be beneficial to their students. And understand that the decision maker isn't the end user. Have those distinctions and make sure that you're serving all of them with what they need.
I think that's really wise advice, and it's a great note to end on. Sukh, once again, I want to thank you for sharing your experience with the community today, and sharing your time, and I wish you the best of luck as you grow Code Naturally and take it to the next stage.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your time. Have a great rest of your day.